Hello everyone, this is Space Café Podcast, and I am Markus. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I really feel like I want someone to come along and bang their fist on the table to make things right again. Like, I don't know, with all those issues we're facing today, climate change, global frictions, food injustice, the distribution of water, the education system / industry in shambles, health, space junk. Don't forget about space junk. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but who would this someone be? We're hoping for the someone with the Avengers fist. He or she represents the values I hold dear, of course. I guess the ones that I believe are right from my own vantage point in the middle of the Western world. This is where the blueprints of the standards originate, right? This is the center from where, truth be told, the umbilicus of the universe, this wobbly sphere we call home. Now, to all my topologist friends out there among you, you might be rolling your eyes right now, as there is, of course, no center on the surface of a sphere. Nicholas Copernicus, Charles Darwin, and Sigmund Freud each challenged the notion of humans at the center of the universe and the pinnacle of creation. Nicholas Copernicus made it clear that not the Earth, but the Sun is at the center of the universe, which, as it turns out, is just a solar system in a myriad of solar systems, in a galaxy, in a myriad of galaxies, in a galaxy cluster, in a myriad of galaxy clusters. Charles Darwin took the crown of creation from our heads and placed us in a long line of animal evolution. And Sigmund Freud suggested that the conscious will may not be the master in its own house up there, and that a significant part of the mind's life remains beyond our knowledge and dominion. These ideas are especially significant after centuries of religious indoctrination, wanting us to believe that we were uniquely willed by God, or the gods, or whoever. Such mortifications, as Sigmund Freud called them, leave a lasting impact on us, but are a thing of the past, I guess. It's on us to push hard and work collaboratively. We're alone in all this, and that's a great thing. It's painful, of course, but we need to find compromise and solutions to the global issues. To this end, I present to you, as my guest today, Niklas Hedman, a top diplomat at the United Nations and acting director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. And he's right now with me in the Space Café studio today. As a lawyer and diplomat, it's his job to find collaborative solutions, even in challenging times.
Can you tell me what you had for breakfast?
A cup of coffee. Yes, a latte. That was my breakfast today.
Please, my friends, if you can, take some time and let this episode sink in deeply, as this one is really important. It's about all of us. Let's go.
Let's just jump right into the fact of the matter. China announced a couple of days ago, well, they didn't announce it, they were discussing to bring up constellations on their own end into space to have something to counterbalance Elon Musk's constellation. Would the Chinese government have to call you for permission, the United Nations?
No, there is no permission when it comes to deploying satellites. And as you brought up, mega constellations, the system works, as you might know, we have the treaties on outer space. So you have rights and obligations vested with those treaties. The Outer Space Treaty is paramount in that sense. We also have a special treaty, registration convention. And it establishes the registration system surrounding everything you put in orbit and beyond. Mm-hmm. So it's not only satellites in Earth orbit, but also probes and deep space mission equipment. And there is an obligation to register satellites. And even, if you take mega constellations, you are also obliged to register the satellites comprising mega constellations. And it's good that you brought this up, because this is a rather new phenomenon. The deployment, or I would say establishment and deployment of mega constellations around the Earth, so in orbit around the Earth. And it's relatively new, and it has put a lot of pressure on the registration system, first of all, which is an administrative system only, but it puts pressure on that, because those constellations, not only the ones that are up now, but the ones that are in planning, could comprise thousands of small satellites. So there is an issue there. And I would say, as long as states register their satellites in constellations, then they do what they have to do internationally. The other issue of mega constellations, and since it is a rather new phenomenon, is that it has gained a lot of attention at the intergovernmental level. And I represent the Office for Outer Space Affairs, and now since 1 year I'm acting director of the office. I used to be the secretary of COPUS, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which is this intergovernmental body, and its two subcommittees, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee and Legal Subcommittee, for 17 years. So I worked in this environment for quite long, and before that, I was a delegate representing my country, Sweden, for 10 years at the sessions of this body. And over those years, there are, always, I would say, contemporary issues and concerns and that really require considerations at the international level. And now recently, we see that mega constellations is such a topic today, which gains more and more attention. The other issue with mega constellations, and you brought it up also by referring to private sector entities, which are the ones really being, at the forefront on developing mega constellations, as we have seen. And that is a constant issue that has been, with this intergovernmental body, the relationship between governments and governmental agencies, and also non-governmental entities. And there we are thinking for first and foremost about operational stakeholders, so private sector entities. And they are driving very much of the development of space activities today. And it is a constant debate within this intergovernmental body whether there should be a closer relationship, I wouldn't say relationship, but maybe a closer cooperation between delegations at the intergovernmental level and representatives from private sector. And that is a constant discussion. And it seems today that majority of governments, they absolutely have to deal with the fact that they have private sector representatives under their jurisdiction. Whether it's the major spacefaring nations or emerging space nations, the space industry collectively in the world is growing.
Absolutely. And some say that governments are acting too slow because the private sector is ramping up its potential so rapidly. So is there a truth to it?
And this is a good question. And I know, and I hear that often, and particularly coming from private sector, that the intergovernmental process is too slow. And well, I don't know if it's too slow. I think you have to also take it from the following angle, that states are responsible for space activities carried out by non-governmental entities under their jurisdiction. So, and that is laid down in the Outer Space Treaty, Article 6, by the way. So they are responsible for that. And it is stipulated that those governments, they shall authorize and license and conduct supervision of those activities. So it's already there. The fabrics of governance and order in outer space activities is laid down already in 1967 by the Outer Space Treaty. So a government cannot say that, well, it's whether it's too slow or too fast, and we don't know, and we really need to discuss this further. No, they are responsible for this. So it's their responsibility to foresee that the private sector is also acting, within the overall framework of responsibility and responsible behavior of space activities. At the same time, the intergovernmental process, and particularly in this body, COPUS, which was established in 1958 already, it received its permanent status in 1959. So we see we're dealing here with an intergovernmental body that is quite old. And ever since the beginning, it has been working under consensus. So all decision-making in this intergovernmental body is done by consensus, which means that all have to agree, or I would say all have to disagree. So it's like you might not like the decisions, but you do it for the sake of unity. Everyone is committed to the decisions that are being taken in this body. Because it is consensus, it takes time. So the more complex issues you are dealing with in negotiations, the more political issues you are dealing with in negotiations, the longer time it takes to reach consensus.
How does that work these days during the Ukraine-Russia conflict? How does that work? Because we are seeing that many, many decisions are being blocked by partners. So how can you ever come to an agreement, a consensus?
In this intergovernmental body, we are concerned with the peaceful uses of outer space. So this intergovernmental body, COPUS, which is serviced by the office I represent, the Office for Outer Space Affairs, we are dealing with international cooperation in the peaceful uses of outer space, which means civilian space cooperation. And it is really the focus on the agenda setting of this intergovernmental body and its two subcommittees is really a broad range of topics that relate to how we are using space technology and how we develop space technology, capacity building of emerging space nations, etc. And we have seen now last year and also this year, because we right now concluded a session of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee a few weeks ago. And indeed, there are geopolitical concerns. There is tension among delegations. Obviously, we see that. But those tensions have not hindered this intergovernmental body to continue performing. So in the end, a few weeks ago, and also during the sessions last year, we managed to have a full-fledged substantive report. Working groups are working. We have several working groups, and they make their work, they progress in their work. And the committee, I also wanted to pick that up. The committee now has 102 states members, so 102 governments that are associated with this body. And there you have nearly all the major spacefaring nations. So you have Russian Federation, India, China, United States, and a range of European countries, etc. So from all over the world. But the major spacefaring nations are represented in this body, and they are very active in the deliberations. And as you brought up, the war and other geopolitical situations that we face now, that has not hindered this intergovernmental body to continue working.
Give us a little bit of an insight into the everyday work with your colleagues, especially also from Russia. Before the conflict, you would shake hands with your Russian partners and counterparts. Is that different during, after the or during the war? Now, would they behave differently? Because it's the same people.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say this is also in a way, the way that the United Nations work, you see, intergovernmental bodies, and I represent the Secretariat, so I must, really be professional and open-minded to all states, all governments of United Nations member states. And this conflict you relate to right now, it's not the only conflict in the world. And we have had past conflicts over a span of 60 years. So it is the geopolitical context is there. But in the daily work as a UN Secretariat official servant, obviously I have to maintain relations with representatives of all states. And we also see in the work of this body that governments, and they're represented by their delegations to the sessions that I mentioned, they are professional in the sense that we have an agenda here. COPUS has its agenda, and we have a common goal to continue working. And therefore, they all do that. So delegations do that professionally. And obviously, as I said, geopolitical situations and considerations are there. We cannot deny that. But COPUS is an intergovernmental body that is moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Let's go back to the moment when you mentioned the Chinese constellation. So any object in space must be registered. Mm-hmm. What if someone does not register? So do you know that everything is registered, or how does that work?
No, and this is a very good point. And this is obviously also something that is being debated and pops up from time to time. You see, international space law, as it is represented by the 5 legally binding treaties, and then we have also voluntary and non-legally binding instruments supporting the treaties. There are no enforcement mechanisms under international space law. So there is no kind of international policing function. So it's really a way of states knowing that they have responsibility for their actions in space, and they are responsible for actions of subjects under their jurisdiction, and they can be held liable in case they cause damage, in case there is damage caused to other space objects or on the Earth, etc. So it's like a system where every actor know that they could get hurt financially if they do something wrong. So that is, I would say, quite an interesting feature that puts this awareness in when you are conducting space activities, you have to do it right. And as I said, no enforcement mechanism, so there is no policing function in outer space. So as you brought up the registration, if you don't register an object that you have deployed, yes, and if you haven't registered it, well, then you haven't, you see, because there is no one that can put an enforcement upon you to register. But it is a collective, I would say, commitment of governments to take this seriously and to register objects. So we see quite a lot of objects that are being registered, particularly, I would say, objects that are functional. So when you launch and deploy a satellite, the satellite is being registered. It's not the same always with other, I would say, parts of the space object, meaning parts of the space vehicle, the upper stages, for instance, because they are also hardware that are in orbit and they immediately become debris. So that is actually a part of a space debris dilemma, and they should also be registered. And that some do and others don't. But when it comes to active functional satellites, I would say that the registration rate is high and has been high for a long time. With mega constellations, we obviously face a situation that will continue now, where constellations, if they get larger and larger, they will contain more and more satellites, and satellites getting smaller and smaller, you see. And that might then also be a problem when it comes to the registration of those objects. For liability, it is the same. The liability provisions apply to any space object. It doesn't matter the size of the object, etc. So if your small CubeSat collides with another satellite and it create damage, then you could be held liable, you see. So this liability system inbuilt in the legal framework of outer space activities is quite interesting, because it really puts pressure on the actors to do it right, so to say.
What's the greater problem for UNOOSA, for you? International intergovernmental consensus building, or the mitigation of space debris?
The mitigation of space debris is something that is really at the core of almost everything we deal with in this intergovernmental body. So, I just as an example, we have obviously, and I think I should tell you this because that could be interesting to the listeners. So, the agenda setting of the committee and its two subcommittees comprises different nature of items. So, on the one hand, we are this community, 102 states member and around 50 permanent observer organizations, both intergovernmental and non-governmental. They focus on the one hand, items and topics where we look into how we're using space technology and satellites for sustainable development on planet Earth. There we have space and climate change, space and global health, disaster management, etc. So we're looking into that from that angle, that perspective of sustainable development on planet Earth. Sustainability for Earth. But then obviously we also have to ask the question, what do we need to do to be able to continue using our assets in orbit, to continue helping our life and humanity on Earth? Well, sustainability in space. And there we have a range of items dealing with hazards. And one is space debris. The other is space weather, by the way, the impact of the sun. And we're also looking into planetary defense, meaning near-Earth objects, namely the potential threat of asteroids hitting the Earth. So there is a range of such topics that relate to really the safeguarding both planet Earth from incoming asteroids, but also promoting the safety of space operations. And the core there is space debris mitigation. And I have to mention here in this context that space debris mitigation is a term we're using for what the operators need to do, and also the manufacturing of satellites. It's not only operational, but also in the design of the hardware, what they need to take into account and to build in to be able to kick a satellite non-functional out of orbit, for instance, or how to deorbit that satellite so it re-enters the atmosphere and burns up. So those are mitigation measures. Then we also have what we call, or label, I would say, space debris remediation. And there you go into active debris removal, meaning it completely different. Yes, and there are a lot of examples, and there's a lot of research going on, and there are a lot of actions now coming up where you are testing various technologies. So that is space debris removal.
Are there any policies in place already? If I were to launch my own constellation, would I need to already bring deorbiting mechanisms on board?
Well, it is there, but it's not locked down in legally binding treaties. So when it comes to space debris mitigation, we have, for instance, the space debris mitigation guidelines from 2007, and we also have the long-term sustainability guidelines that were adopted in 2019. But those instruments are voluntary and non-legally binding. So again, we are further away from any enforcement. So there is no central international enforcement in this regard. So it really rests with the actor and the operator to take the right decision, on how to deal with
what are we waiting for when it comes to an implementation? What's hindering us to come up with something?
Well, if you mean a new instrument or developing
a legally
further
binding
instruments,
instrument. Yeah.
Well, it's again, there is no consensus on having new.
But I think we would need it right
instruments.
now.
Well,
because we're polluting.
I know, and I hear that there are views that yes, we need new legally binding instruments. We need more robust instruments or provisions at the international level to tackle this particular problem. But there is no consensus. There are states that want that, and there are other states that don't believe that would be the best way to proceed.
Excuse my question, but who would not believe in this? I mean, this is not a matter of belief. This is just a question of time until the window closes and there's no more space travel altogether.
Yeah, but again, we have legally binding treaties already, and none of them contain any true enforcement mechanism. So the question I ask then is, what is the real difference between a legally binding treaty without enforcement mechanism and a voluntary non-legally binding instrument that has been adopted by consensus, meaning that all the governments are buying into that voluntary instrument? So the question is, which is more effective in dealing with the day-to-day activities and also dealing with the challenges and the hazards to space activities? So that is an open question. And this is constantly the way the international community is working in this area is to, they have their national priorities. They have building up their national space activities, and they are launching, and more states are, by the way, deploying satellites in orbit. We see a lot of small countries now being able to deploy their very first satellite in the form of a CubeSat, for instance. Then they become spacefaring. So they become part of this, the club, so to say. It's up to everyone to realize that we are all in it together, because if you create a situation in orbit where it's your fault, for instance, that a collision happens and you create damage and you create space debris, you also put your own space object into danger in that situation. So you see, it's in a way, if I use the term self-regulatory way of performing space activities.
I have the impression that it's us human beings who are standing in our own way here, because it's pretty much the same what we're doing here on Earth. Everyone is waiting for the other to do something against pollution and plastic debris and the oceans and climate change. Nothing really substantial is happening because it's all like non-really binding and there's nothing in place. So maybe there's nothing we can do because it's our human way of doing things. It's a pretty much fatalistic approach.
Yeah. No, you're right. And yes, and we see this, as you say correctly, in so many areas. And honestly, this is not a modern phenomenon. This is the way humans have behaved ever since the dawn of time. I mean, we are talking thousands of years where we have this way of, in a way, reaching out for new resources that we need, and in that sense also creating damage to the environment. So it's nothing new, really. And as you say correctly, this is the way how we act, but it will probably come to a point where we have to change the way we act. And I'm not talking only about space activities, but you have for climate change, etc. And yeah, I don't know. I don't have the crystal ball here, so I cannot tell. But obviously, we need to take care of planet Earth. It's the only home in universe, as we know.
There's no planet B, they say.
Well, and we are also, of course, we are following discussions and plans, to build structures on other celestial bodies, on other planets, colonize planets in the solar system. That's fine, but I think it would be an illusion to think that we can abandon our home planet Earth and create a new life in another.
We're just running away from
We're running away from the problems we should tackle.
Yeah.
So if we realize that and do that, then let's see.
Some say 2023 is the year of artificial intelligence, or the onset of massive artificial intelligence on a large scale. Mm-hmm. Do you think this could help get us out of that predicament, that artificial intelligence can help us bring up the decision-making structures and speed up those processes? Or will that always need to be a human face-to-face debate?
Interesting question, because and apart from artificial intelligence, I mean, we are now, at least here, we're coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we all remember, during the pandemic, and that's now nearly 3 years, where we had to find new ways of communicating. So I'm just taking as an example this intergovernmental body that I'm working with. We had to resort to virtual and hybrid meetings. And I remember in 2021, when we really had the pandemic around us, we had 10 people in the meeting room, in the conference room, and we had 300 joining virtually. It worked, but again, it's not the same as true diplomacy. True diplomacy is when you can sit in front of yourself, you can talk together, you are there face to face, and you negotiate and you come to terms. That is diplomacy. Virtual communication is not optimal for that. So artificial intelligence, I know it's really a fantastic development in that technology field, but I don't think that AI would be able, I would say the design would be able to handle situations where you really need the human mind. And that is in diplomacy, where you really need humans to sit together and discuss and be frank to each other and come to terms and achieve consensus. How would artificial intelligence be able to substitute the human mindset of communicating with each other?
Perhaps just to implement a doomsday clock on every decision maker's desk when the window of space debris is closing, maybe that could be something that could be more beneficial than
Of course. I mean, obviously, you're using this new technology in terms of assisting the process.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. We were talking about the new players, the new space industry. We have the old space industry. So where do you see the role of UNOOSA, the United Nations, in all of this? Is this an alleviating role for the United Nations already?
We and this is quite new, I would say. The whole boom, I would say, of space activities with new space is not that old, as we know. But space industry, or as you refer to, old space, has been there ever since the beginning of the space era. For UNOOSA, as a UN secretariat, our constituents are member states, a government of member states. But we are working more and more also together with non-governmental actors, either non-governmental organizations or with private sector entities. And I won't give any example, because if I give one example, then I forget another one. But we are working with also with private sector in helping developing countries and emerging space nations to be able to deploy satellite CubeSats in orbit, and also to be part of research in orbit, particularly when it comes to gravity research, so zero gravity, where you go up, either you go into space and do that, or you can use laboratories and centrifuge and etc., the technology being used for zero gravity research. And that is also provided in some cases here with private sector entities. You asked about, well, you made the distinction between old space and new space. And yes, I know. And there is a lot of focus on new space, a lot of focus on entrepreneurship. But I would say, yes, fine. But old space, I mean, the old industries, building hardware, building satellites are there. And they are equally important as, startups in the modern, I would say, contemporary and future space activities.
Where does UNOOSA stand in all of this? Old space was all about the Cold War and was also about the propagation of knowledge. Now, new space is also about making money in space. So where do you stand in all of this?
Well, as a UN entity, we have to always be mindful of the fact that we are representing states. We are representing the United Nations. So we cannot, we have to be careful when we enter into partnerships, particularly with private actors. And that we do. So we do that. And we are aware of that. And I would say that we see this not only for our office, the Office for Outer Space Affairs, but if you look at the United Nations at large, there are a broad range of UN departments and offices and organs that are more and more also working in partnership with private sector. And it's like this is now the future in a sense. So it's not only governments and the UN Secretariat system or specialized agencies, but you also have a growing, I would say, collection of private actors. And not only private companies, but you also have non-governmental organizations and that we're also working with. So it's an evolution, and this is the future, particularly in an area such as space activities. This is the future.
Speaking of the future, would you try to think now 10 years ahead? Where do you see the space industry headed from now on in 10 years? And what challenges does that produce to UNOOSA?
I would say 10 years is not a long time.
Yeah.
Because when you look at it and you think that, okay, a decade from now, it seems to be a long time, but it is not. So in 10 years, I don't see that much difference to what we already see today. But if you go 20 or 30 and even further on years ahead, I do hope that all actors, governments and non-governmental partners, and operators particularly, operators whether they are governmental or non-governmental, that they would all really see the benefit that we have the benefits of space and the orbits around the Earth, and that we collectively find a way of treating our outer space environment or near Earth environment in a responsible manner, that we all see that and we do that. And also beyond that, the moon and other celestial bodies, because there is now a lot of attention given to exploration, exploitation and utilization of resources on the moon and on other planets, but also at large celestial bodies, which also includes asteroids. And that is coming, and that is the future that we need to deal with. The mining of natural resources on those bodies in the solar system. And we have to do that right, you see. So every actor come to the point where they realize that we have to do this together because we are all in it together. And that is a hope I have, that we would do it right, and that there is a responsible action by every operator in space.
Who do you see as the major operators in space in those coming years?
I would say you cannot, it's difficult to put, governments and then, private operators against each other. I think governments would still be the main actors and having I would say the largest responsibility. But we see already now a shift in terms of private operators becoming more and more active, and they're also becoming they're more actors around, and that will only continue. So you will have more private actors in space activities, not only in orbital activities, but also in space resource utilization.
Do we have countries, emerging countries, that we're not thinking of right now, but that you may have already knowledge of?
This is an interesting question, because we see now, since quite a few years, a growing activity around the world. I mean, it's not only the major spacefaring nations we're talking about, but we really see emerging space nations, developing countries, small developing countries that are investing in their own national space industry and their national space activities. And that is growing. We see that. And I think in the future, all states will be more and more dependent on space activities and space assets. There will be only a growth. I can see that, only a growth on also engagement in orbital activities. When it comes to resource utilization and exploration of celestial bodies, hard to say if more and more states will be active in that, but I believe so, because we see now how important space has become. And it's interesting to relate back to, the global agendas for sustainable development, the SDGs, which we see 2030 is coming up. It's around the corner. How is the status in achieving those SDGs? And what is crystal clear today, and what is really growing as an understanding worldwide, is the dependence on space assets, to achieve the sustainable development goals. And that is what we see. And here, as a small office, UNOOSA is a small office, but we have quite a large program where we are really working in this area, where we're helping states to become part of the space quest. And we are also, we have projects and partnerships where we're really looking into the use of space technology for sustainable development. So this is, in a way, a priority of this office.
Do you see a development into competence regions around the world? Because or is everyone trying to do the same? Because I could imagine that Austria may never be a launching country, but maybe a competence center for something else.
I would say this has been going on for a long time, because space activities are costly. I mean, it's really not a joke to build, manufacture, launch, and deploy and operate a satellite in orbit. It costs a lot, and that has always been the fact. Now the costs have decreased because satellites have become smaller, and you can launch many of them at the same go. So you distribute the cost. Okay. But we have seen for so many years that international cooperation is vital, so that you spread out the costs, the risks, and also the competences. So international cooperation has been there for a long time, for many years. And I would see that it's even increasing international cooperation, because, as you say, it is a very costly activity we're dealing with. But also, and this is right what you pointed out, it's not that all states need to be develop the capacity to launch satellites, because you have other states that can launch it for you. But more and more states will be involved in developing activities in outer space. And as you say, it could be know-how, it could be, developing robotics, it could be other elements, software. And that is also going to increase in the whole world. The African continent is really coming strongly when it comes to build up knowledge and experience and a local national market for space activities. So Latin America likewise, and Asia Pacific, which has really been operating space activities for a longer period. But you see around the world, it's growing and it's spreading out to new actors, meaning new countries, new governments, and also the development of a private sector at local and regional level. And it's growing. Yeah, it will.
What excites you most when you think about the next couple of years and the space industry? Is there anything that you personally are most excited by?
Well,
maybe a technological development, or I don't know, whatever. You pick the topic.
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me whether I would like to go to outer space. Because everyone...
Would you?
No, everyone wants to be an astronaut. No, I stay on Earth. It's better for me. Well, it is exciting what we see, and it's exciting to be part of this evolution, I would say, and because it's going faster and faster, and it's growing all the time. And that is probably what I find very exciting. I'm a lawyer myself, and I deal a lot with international law, mainly international space law. And if I would put something like a dream, that would actually be to really go about and start developing new legally binding treaties in any area, because I like it. But I also realize that for the foreseeable future, it's not realistic with new treaties in this particular area. But as an excitement for a lawyer, will always be the development of legal materia.
Right, beautiful. It's a dream of yours. There's science fiction out there, so maybe this is part of science fiction still.
Yeah.
Do you have a space interest? A personal do you have a history in the space world also?
No, and honestly, I started actually in the law of the sea, so that is my area of expertise. Ocean affairs, international fisheries, boundary delimitations between countries at sea. So that is really the area where I started, and then I slipped into outer space because it's those two disciplines under international law
bodies
are and they are quite similar, because you're dealing with activities beyond national jurisdiction. So in the legal sense, it's very easy to deal with space law if you come from a law of the sea background or vice versa. So I don't have that, I would say, childhood interest in science fiction or in space. It was more on shipping and maritime issues. But I see now that I am in space. I've been dealing with space affairs for now 27 years, and I'm actually soon to retire, and I will continue working more academically in space affairs. But I will leave the United Nations, and I see myself as a sailor then, that's adequate, as a sailor in this evolution of space activities in the ocean.
Anything you would love to leave behind to those who will follow once you're retiring? Anything you would like to tell them?
Yeah, I would say since I'm retiring from this office, the Office for Outer Space Affairs, I'm quite passionate about this office and how the office has evolved over years. And I believe that the office really has its fundamental role as a secretariat to this intergovernmental body. So there we would continue working closely with our constituents, the member states, in really further developing this intergovernmental body into new areas that we already see. And at that time, also at the same time, capacity building. We are doing so much in this office in helping emerging space nations to require know-how and to develop their capacities to get involved in space activities. And this is really the two strengths of this office. And they, in a way, go hand in hand, you see, because we are supporting member states and they are our constituents in this intergovernmental body, but we are also supporting them bilaterally, to build up their national programs. So I really wish this office continue developing those strengths.
We've been seeing lots and lots of challenges globally in different aspects, in different walks of life. You've been with governmental and intergovernmental bodies for decades now. Do you see any development amongst human beings, amongst those bodies, that you would say that's a positive inspiration for the future and something good is evolving? Do you see something like this? Because, we're seeing in our media diet, daily media diet, we are seeing that the world is falling apart. I was just wondering, is there anything you would counterbalance to that? If there's nothing, please do also tell me.
Well, it's a difficult question because, as we know, we are facing challenges, not only geopolitical challenges, but environmental challenges. And I understand and I feel the same, that it's like we have hazards and threats and challenges all around us. But still, and I began with that, still I see that the climate within the intergovernmental multilateral work is flourishing. It's going forward. And there is a way of an optimism you can see among our delegations that regularly come to our sessions. And we are dealing with new topics, new areas of concern to humanity and to space activities, because that is what we're discussing here. So I see that optimism, but at the same time, we cannot shy and we cannot close our eyes for the problems that we are facing. And there are so many problems, as you say. But I would say, optimistic. I am optimist. So I try to be an optimist. Yeah.
I have two final questions, completely unusual questions now to what we've been talking about. Question number one is, we do have a playlist for the future space traveler on Spotify. So I'm asking every guest for their tune they want to introduce to the Spotify playlist for the long space journey we are maybe headed for at some point. And it's going to be a very boring space journey because it's very long to go wherever we want to go. What kind of tune would you want to bring?
Oh, that came as a surprise. I would say, and it's not because we are dealing with space here, but David Bowie, Space Oddity, and I suppose everyone would pick that.
That one is picked already, so you need to come up with another one.
Okay, but I just want to say it's the lyrics are fantastic, and not only the lyrics, the whole song is fascinating. So it gives that sad feeling, but also, it's something grand you are in. Okay, well, I don't have really a song. But there is an old British rock band that I've been listening to for so many years, Hawkwind. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know them. Yeah. Dave Brock and his colleagues, and they are still playing. I mean, they came in the 70s and they are still around. I don't really find now a song by them. Let me think. One of my favorites, Back in the Box.
Back in the Box. So be it.
Yes.
Good. I'll introduce it to the Spotify playlist.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And the last question, this show is called Space Café Podcast. It's a coffee place. So in coffee places, you now and then energize yourself with an espresso. Now, why don't you share an espresso for the mind with us, where our audiences get away from that show inspired and energized, even more inspired? We've been talking about many inspiring things so far, but is there something you would think that could be an inspiration for the audiences, like an espresso for the mind?
Okay. I'm gonna take it from the following angle. So we have been discussing now challenges, geopolitical concerns, issues and concerns in the way we perform space activities. What are the hazards that we face? But that we cannot get around that. So we have to really focus on how to make life better, not on Earth only, but also how to make the way we conduct space activities. But I would say there is something that unites many people working in the space sector, and that is that fascination and the kind of a dream. You look at the moon and you feel a connection to another celestial body. And the moon, we see the moon, and it only opens new thoughts, dreams. So I would say a little bit of what science fiction has brought to humanity, literature, over so many years. Don't stop dreaming and keep that motivation to think of the future of our place in our solar system. And that will actually give you more dreams and more inspiration in really tackling also the problems we face here on Earth.
Wonderful. Niklas Hedman, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you. Indeed, my pleasure. Really.
Thank you everyone for listening. If you found this episode helpful, perhaps consider sharing it with someone who has perhaps lost faith in our world or in their world. Sometimes it makes sense to remind ourselves that now and then it's just the media and they have a game to play. Guys, don't take everything too seriously. Life and humans are good, mostly. Bye-bye.